by saying that the resolution for this debate, for the first semi-formal debate, is resolved: anarchy is better for society than the minimal state. So we have a debate topic on no government versus limited government. And our two debaters on the pro-anarchy side, would you raise your hand? Got two here. They volunteered to debate on the for-government side, which I suspected was a plot, so we didn't allow them to do that. Our two debaters on the minimal state side, would you raise your hand? Okay. And what I'm going to ask is, first, one person from the affirmative give a quick 5-minute presentation on your views. Then we'll have
the first round of questions.
And then from the other team, one of you will ask a couple questions, cross-examination, just of the affirmative. Then we'll have the negative, first negative, give a 5-minute presentation with a couple questions from someone on the affirmative, and then follow the same for the rest. Okay? So we're ready for, I'll be the timekeeper, we're ready for our first affirmative presentation.
Hello, does everybody hear me, or does this work? Why have a debate among libertarians among minimal state versus no state? Well, first of all, it should be noted that as libertarians we believe strongly that the principles of freedom should be upheld, and whatever system works best to minimize aggression and interference with people's freedoms should be the one chosen by all consistent libertarians who actually want to live by the principle of liberty, freedom, and non-aggression. So the natural question which arises is, what system best minimizes aggression? Is it a system where force and power and, let's say, what we call legitimate violence is concentrated in one organization? Or is it in one political entity? Or is it a system which decentralizes violence and power as much as possible, perhaps even to the extent that every individual has some sort of power and is able to protect his property, his privacy, and ultimately his freedom? So we would argue that no state is the best operational option in order to maximize freedom. It's the only consistent option given the fact that freedom entails non-coercion, and taxes, which are necessary for any state, some sort of taxation or fiscality, go against this principle by its very nature, because we coercively take resources from people who build them and who work for them in order to finance public goods like defense or whatever public goods may be, and that in itself constitutes an aggression, whatever the justifications for it. So we would argue that not only is no state better operationally, but it's also more consistent with our general theoretical principle. Also, another problem which we face is, even if we make the indulgence of, for strategic reasons, allowing the argument to be made that a minimal state is better than what we have today, which no one would argue against, and this should be our goal. How much coherency can we have to convince people of our goals if we ourselves don't take them to the limit of their coherency, if we ourselves don't uphold them in every sort of aspect of our lives? So I would argue that even as a strategical principle, we should still argue for no state, even if by some miracle we would get to a minimal state. And another problem of the minimal state is that empirical evidence, but I don't really like to use social experiments because I don't think it's necessarily the best argument to be made. But as a social experiment, we can always see that states have the tendency to grow. Even minimal states or governments which have been made by very smart people with a lot of checks and balances have grown, and the United States are a very, very good example of this, from what the founding fathers wanted to make of them to what they grew in today and what they're still growing into. And also many many other organizations who have checks and balance systems which are made to prevent abuse, to prevent their growth, and still fail. So the question would be to ask ourselves, can we have a minimal state? Can we have a minimal state on the long run? Is it durable, or is it damned to grow? And to grow into something that future libertarians will have to fight again. So this would be our main points to argue for a no state, that the minimal state grows, that it's more coherent, to argue for coherent with our libertarian principles, to argue for a no state. It's an operationally valid system that actually can minimize aggression, and it's a better strategical tactic to convince people to be coherent with one's principles. Thank you very much.
Okay, so cross-examination, you have a couple questions?
I was wondering if without any state you can guarantee universal law throughout the country. Don't you risk ending up with courts of justice imposing their own rules, which might be contradictory?
Well, there might be different system of rules, but they would only apply to people who already chose to abide by those rules. For instance, in contracts, if two people sign a set of, agree upon a set of rules, they would be both judged by that set of rules and would both have those rules imposed upon them. But that's not a problem because they both agreed to those rules in the first place. And this is for contracts, but we can also infer from the bigger picture, let's say public order, people with whom you don't already have a contract. There would most likely be protection agencies like we have today, police, which are more of them and in competition, and which would have each of them their set of rules, which they try to make as best as possible for people to accept them, and that would govern the whole dealings of individuals who chose that protection agency to protect their welfare. Also, for people who are not in the same protection agency, we may find that war is a very harmful and costly solution, so that they may negotiate among themselves another set of rules governing what happens between individuals of two different protection agencies.
Suppose you sign a contract with someone, and you obey one set of rules, and that person obeys other set of rules, and he or she doesn't tell you about that thing. And suppose you are a protector of the property rights, and the other one is a classical utilitarian, believes that he might come over your property and do whatever he or she wants if that serves the public good. You take that person to your court and you judge that person, and you have a verdict, and then that person refutes your verdict and says, no, by my court of law to which I belong, this doesn't apply.
The classical answer, if it's a contract, is very easy because you can stipulate your arbiter before. So we can both agree upon one person to judge our conflict, and whatever that person judges to be right, that's what we have to go by.
And if there isn't
Okay,
a contract...
you've run out of question time there, so I'm going to argue for shorter questions and shorter answers. If you just have like 2 minutes to do the cross-examination, you'll have time to bring these issues up again. So in fact, it's the negative time to do a 5-minute presentation.
Okay, we weren't exactly thinking about that sort of minimal state that people usually think about. More precisely, the minimal state which functions based on taxes and which provides at least public safety and the law system. We were thinking about a minimal state that might work on voluntary donations and which didn't provide that those two public goods, but which still existed just as a symbol in order for people to feel more secure. Because when you know that there is someone above you who is watching you and is judging you, you will be less inclined to do something that you shouldn't do.
No, I was thinking also to complete my my colleague. We think that our degree of minimal state it's a small degree. It's not referred to education, healthcare, that we believe that is a privatized sector. So we believe that it's necessary, especially starting from the point that now in the world there are no such examples, realistic examples for this. So it's necessary a transition period. So how you make this transition from a state with a big government to directly to anarchic and no state. So it's necessary, as Hayek said, that it's necessary the rule of law to create institutions that are necessary for giving this sense of safe to the citizen. But this means no burden of taxes at a level that is now in these big governments. That means no public healthcare or public education that can be realized totally privatized. But I asked them if they told me that everyone is able to protect his property. We are very optimistic, of course, to think this, but we must think that are also part of people which are unable to protect themselves, to protect their properties. So maybe it's necessary to have a small, I can coin this term of lean government. You know that is lean companies in management is very used this type of terms, which means companies which have a little head, not a big headquarters. So the management of the activities in that community is taken from bottom to up. So it's community governance. This minimal state represents, in fact, a government which is elected from bottom to up. The legislation is created from bottom to up.
And basically our only legislation is relied to the property right.
Okay, so you've run out of your 5 minutes for your presentation, and I'm
And the reason to have a minimal state is to make sure, in our opinion, that we have that same law enforced
right. So that
all around.
makes sense what you presented, but that's your 5-minute limit, and you'll have a chance for another 5 minutes in your tag team version of this here, which is okay. But the other side now can ask a couple questions, and they should ask a question just from one of you, and let's say just one of you respond to that. Okay?
Yeah, so my first question would be that you said that
Could I get you to speak up, maybe toward the microphone a little bit, or I don't know if they're working or not, just speak louder.
there's no
Okay.
Just scream.
My first question will be, don't you think that if there's no tax, there is no state? You said that the people of this state will not be burdened with taxes. What do you mean?
We mean that we won't impose any taxes.
It's
All of the
voluntary.
money that is gathered will be from donations.
From donations.
In
So
order
how
to-
is this different then from, let's say, a private tribunal, private organization? And why do you call it a state? Because if it's from a private from private donations,
Because people need to feel protected. People need to believe that they are not